Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Hi everyone, how are you feeling today? I hope everyone is in good health today. Let me introduce myself. I am Nurul Zuraini binti Zulkifli from SMK Datuk Haji Abdul Wahab, Sungai Siput, Perak. Boys and girls, before we get started, please make sure you are ready with your Science Form 2 textbook, a notebook, and stationery. Alright? Now, let's get started. Boys and girls, today you will learn about the absorption and transportation of digested food and defecation. Before we get started, let's take a look at the learning objectives for our lesson today. By the end of this lesson, you will be able to first, conduct an experiment to explain the absorption of the end product of digestion. Second, relate the function of the digestive system, the blood circulatory system, and the respiratory system. And third, elaborate and communicate about defecation. Alright, now are you ready, boys and girls? Boys and girls, here I have a slice of bread. Now I will eat this bread. Let's look at these two videos on what happens in my body when I eat this bread. After I chew the bread and swallow it, it moves along the alimentary canal, starting from the mouth to the esophagus, and then it moves to the stomach. From the stomach, the food then moves to the small intestine. Boys and girls, you have already learnt in a previous lesson that the food you eat is broken down from large molecules into small molecules by the specific enzymes in the digestion process. The end products of the digestion process are glucose, amino acid, and lastly, fatty acids and glycerol. So boys and girls, what happens to these end products after the digestion is complete? You are right. All the end products are absorbed into the blood circulatory system by the wall of the small intestine. Now, pupils, let us look at how the absorption process occurs in our small intestine. Pupils, the digested food, which is made up of tiny molecules in the small intestine, must be absorbed in large amounts to enable all parts of our body to receive the nutrients. So, to ensure that absorption occurs at a maximum level, the wall of our small intestine has millions of fine projection called villi. This increases the surface area for the process of absorption of digested food. This is what the villi looks like on the small intestine wall. And boys and girls, this is how the villus looks like after it is enlarged from millions of villi. The villus is a single villi. This is the wall of the villus. The wall of the villus is very thin, which is made up of one cell thick to increase the rate of absorption. And this is the blood vessels in the small intestine. Its function is to transport nutrients to all parts of the body. Pupils, do you know how absorption occurs at the villus? Let's take a look at this diagram. Here you can see the structure of a villus. Digested food such as glucose, amino acid, fatty acid and glycerol, which are tiny molecules, are easily absorbed into the blood circulatory system through the walls of the small intestine. These tiny molecules are then taken to every part of the body. This structure is called lacteal. Lacteal absorbs digested fat in the villi of the small intestine. The lacteal transfers it into the lymphatic system and then to the blood circulatory system. Pupils, do you know what happens to the large molecules of food, such as fiber and water? Well, because the size of the molecules is large, it cannot pass through the wall of the small intestine. Let us investigate the absorption process at the small intestine by conducting an experiment. We can use a whisking tube to replace the small intestine in this experiment because it has a similar characteristic to the small intestine wall. This is how the whisking tube looks like. Now, pupils, let's take a look at how to conduct this experiment. First, you have to soak 2 whisking tubes in the water to soften them. Then, after tying up one end of both whisking tubes, pour 10 milliliters of starch suspension into one whisking tube and 10 milliliters of glucose solution into the other whisking tube. Third, after tying up both ends of the whisking tubes and rinsing the tubes with water until clean, immerse each whisking tube in a test tube containing distilled water. Then, carry out a Benedict's test and an iodine test on some of the distilled water from both test tubes. As you have learnt before this, Benedict's test is to test the presence of glucose, and the iodine test is to test the presence of starch. If glucose is present, brick red precipitate is formed when tested with the Benedict test. If the observation is dark blue when tested with the iodine test, that means starch is present. You have to leave the apparatus for 30 minutes. Then, you need to conduct the Benedict's test and the iodine test again on some of the distilled water from both test tubes. Now, boys and girls, let's take a look at the result of this experiment. From the table, we can see that after 30 minutes, the distilled water from the glucose solution changes to a brick red precipitate. This shows that glucose is present in the distilled water after 30 minutes, but no changes have occurred in the other test tube. So, boys and girls, what conclusion can you draw from this experiment? Excellent! Only glucose can diffuse through the whisking tube. This verifies the fact that glucose can diffuse through the wall of the intestine because the size of glucose molecules is very tiny. The size of the starch molecule is too big to pass through the pore of the whisking tube. Boys and girls, after the absorption of the food molecules occur through the wall of the small intestine, where will they go? Well done! They will enter the bloodstream of the blood circulatory system and carry the nutrients to the cells of the body. Just imagine that blood works like a lorry that delivers things from the factory to the shop. Pupils, food that is digested and absorbed into a villus needs to reach the cells of the body. The molecules that are absorbed into the villus will undergo assimilation. What is assimilation? Assimilation is the process of distributing the end products of digestion for the use of the cells in our body. Our body cells use the end products of digestion based on the nutrient function. Glucose is used to produce energy. The function of amino acids is to form components of cells. Fatty acid and glycerol combine together to form fat, which is used as a heat insulator and to protect internal organs. All of these digested food molecules reach the body cells with the help of these the digestive system, the blood circulatory system, and assimilation. To understand more on how these work together, let's look at this flow chart. When food enters the mouth, the food will be digested by the digestive system. The enzymes in the digestive system will break down large and complex particles of food into small and simple molecules so that they can be absorbed into the villi. After absorption at the villi is completed, then the blood circulatory system will take over. The blood transports the small and simple molecules of the digested food to all parts of the body. And lastly, the end products are distributed to the cells through the assimilation process. The distribution of end products is for formation of new cells, respiration, and regulation of body temperature. So pupils, this is how these systems play a role to enable all the body cells to get the nutrients they need. So, pupils, do you have any idea what happens to the food that is not absorbed by the small intestine? Where does the undigested food go? Excellent, boys and girls. The undigested food will move to the large intestine. This is what the large intestine looks like. The large intestine is joined with the small intestine. This is the rectum. And this is the anus. Undigested food and food that is not absorbed by the small intestine, such as fiber, waste secretions of the digestive tract, dead cells, and water, will move into the large intestine. Boys and girls, to understand what happens in the large intestine, let's watch this video clip. While moving through the large intestine by peristalsis, the water and minerals are reabsorbed into the bloodstream. This makes the unabsorbed and undigested food become solid waste, which are called feces. Feces is stored temporarily in the rectum. The feces is then eliminated from the rectum through the anus. The process of the elimination of feces from the body is called defecation. Pupils, we have reached the end of the absorption and transportation of digested food and the defecation process. I hope you can understand what you have learned and have taken down all the important points in your notebook. Please stay with me for the next part of our lesson. In this next part of the lesson, let us try to answer the following questions. Question 1. What is the name of the structure which is formed in folds at the wall of the small intestine? Let's check your answer. You are right. The name of this structure is villi. Next is question 2. Explain how the villi helps in the absorption of food. Good. Villi increases the surface area of the small intestine, which increases the rate of absorption of nutrients by diffusion. Alright, let's go on now to question 3. The diagram shows an experiment on the absorption of food. What is represented by the Viskin tube? Explain. The small intestine is represented by the Viskin tube. This is because the Viskin tubes have similar properties with villi in the small intestine wall that only allows tiny food molecules to pass through it, such as glucose. And now is the last question. Which part of the large intestine stores the feces? Yes, you are absolutely right. It is the rectum. Congratulations to those who have answered all the questions correctly. Well, boys and girls, looks like we are almost at the end of our lesson for today. You should now be able to first, conduct an experiment to explain the absorption of the end products of the digestion. Second, relate the function of the digestive system, blood circulatory system, and respiratory system. And third, elaborate and communicate about defecation. Our lesson has come to an end. I really hope that you have enjoyed today's lesson. Till we meet again, see you in the next class. Assalamualaikum and goodbye everyone.